Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, who is my assistant here and keeps me active here. Daniel, welcome to our program.
Thank you, Dr. Paul.
Well, good. News today says that government's not doing a very good job at making us safe. You know the contention by those who oppose what we talk about, that the purpose of government is to make us safe. And of course, some of us believe it's an impossible task, it's a failure, and governments are supposed to protect our liberties and have equal justice under the law. But here's a TSA report. It comes out and said that they made an effort. They've spent maybe close to, $100 billion since 2011. And nobody likes the TSA that I know of. But here, they had a report done. There was an investigation, and it was supposed to be classified. And guess what? Some American released this information and found out that they're not doing a very good job. 95% failure rate. That's not a very good job in making us safe. Proves our point. It's an impossible task. But wasn't there a hearing not too long ago where they talked about this? And Caraway, who runs the TSA, came before the committee to reassure us all that everything was okay?
Yeah, it makes you wonder about the timeline, because I wonder when exactly this investigation took place. It's called the Red Team investigation, where the Homeland Security Department sends in people undercover to try to bring mock bombs in. And as you say, 95% of those cases, they missed them. But so I wonder if that was taking place while Acting Administrator Caraway was before the Homeland Security, the Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation in March. Because here's what he said to the committee. It's a great government speak. You're going to love this. TSA is a high-performing counterterrorism organization applying a multi-layered, intelligence-driven, risk-based approach to protect the nation's transportation systems.
The key question is he a liar? Or is he a believer? And is he just a bureaucrat that makes himself believe this? But obviously that's a bunch of nonsense, and that's what so much you heard before government committees. It's all spin. They don't call it lying. He might have believed this, but he might have known about the report already and knew what a mess was and think they could keep it classified. But it does bring up memories back to the 9/11 time, how quickly this was put in motion. Not as quickly as the Patriot Act. That was just weeks and it was put in place, but this was a big deal. Who's going to run it? And then that was the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. And it was a big concern of mine. I don't imagine there were very many of us who voted against the Department of Homeland Security, but it was just, as far as I was concerned, nonsense, because in a free society, safety and security should be in the hands of the people. And this was doing exactly the opposite.
Well, you argued at the time that it was like just rearranging the deck chairs and pretending that adding more government layers would somehow be more efficient, which it's not logical.
No, and just think of this money. What this next year's budget, they're asking for over $7 billion, and the total is not precise, but it could be close to about $100 billion over all this time. Just think of how that might have been used. What the alternative be. Not the way government could have used it. They might have just built more bombs or something. But this is part of the security industrial complex. A lot of people make money. Matter of fact, the first chairman, the leader on the Department of Homeland Security, Chertoff, he was in the business of selling machines, these scanner machines.
And I think they were bogus machines. I don't think they worked well. They had to go to a different model, so he sold them junk.
I wonder if he was charged with any kind of corruption or anything.
I'm sure he was.
Yeah.
But I remember at the time people asked you, so what's your solution to this problem?
And there is one. If you look to the rules of a free society, there is one. And that is that private individuals are responsible. Right where we're talking now today in the Lake Jackson area, next door to us are a lot of chemical plants, Dow Chemicals here and others. And they do not depend on the federal government. They do not depend on the local police or the county sheriff. I mean, they might coordinate things. but they have their own security. And you don't climb over their fences, and workers go in under precise conditions, and they provide the security. But that was prohibited with the airlines. The government had already taken over because of the hijacking, and they had some scanning going on, and they had rules: don't ever resist a hijacker, go along with them, and no guns, and no emphasis. I used to use the analogy, I think it's a pretty good one, that our country was taking better care of those companies that were protecting our money, on these armored car vehicles. I mean, they get robbed on occasion, but not very often, and I think that approach would have been much better.
It's amazing when people argue that somehow the airlines that transport you to your destination don't care if you get blown up or don't care if you get hijacked.
No, they have.
Don't they have the most incentive to?
They should. Moral sensitivity as well as legal and as well as financial. I mean, that they would want to do this. But I think so many Americans are frustrated because they see the efforts, all this money being used to check elderly people in wheelchairs and babies in baby carriages and all this nonsense. And then the ugly, vicious pictures of a TSA agent groping individuals, which is really insulting. How could this ever happen to America? And yet, it goes on and on. One rule that they have forgotten, compared to the way we approach things, the way we should, is that governments should never be allowed to do anything that you and I can't do in the private sector. On economic terms, we can't steal. Government shouldn't be able to steal. We can't violate each other's civil liberties. Government should not be able to do that. But what about groping? What if somebody was caught groping in public and they weren't exactly, cooperating? That individual would go to jail.
Yeah, rightly so.
Rightfully so, but you never hear that. This is legal. But the cynic might figure out, well, maybe they have been more successful than we're claiming. We say they're a total failure. But what if, and some people believe this, and some days I think it's a possibility, they want to intimidate us. Those who are true authoritarians, they want us to be obedient to the state, that we respond in a very passive manner. And they've done a pretty good job. We're pretty intimidated, and we all want to get on an airplane, so they achieve a lot of that. And to promote the power of the state, they have to get us very fearful, whether it's economic fear or foreign policy problems that we have. And it reestablishes this whole notion that it's the government's responsibility to make us safe and provide the safety net, once again giving more power to those individuals who believe, maybe deep in their hearts, that people are too stupid and they won't take care of themselves, and that's why we need them to take care of us.
Yeah. I know whenever I fly, I always take the one little tiny bit of revolt that's left, which is to opt out and force them to change the system around and send someone over to, not that I enjoy being groped, but it's just sort of our last chance of protest. And I always get depressed when I'm approaching the scanner and see everyone just hunkering down like zombies going through the machine, and nobody saying opt out,
Right.
and forcing.
No, the choices are terrible. I mean, the choice that you have to take, and you take on principle, it's a terrible one, but it's still, you endorse the system. So the system has to change, is what it has to do. It should be that private individuals should be, responsible for what they're doing. And I think that the most important thing that was done was locking the doors. I think that could have been done before 9/11. It could have been done the day after 9/11. That's probably done more good to thwart the terrorists. And I just think that it's a shame. That was a serious problem. But what we have done is we just diminished the liberties of our people and diminished the responsibility of our people to assume responsibility for themselves.
You know what I worry about? This report shows a 95% failure rate, and you would look at it and say, well, this is the best argument ever to shut down TSA. Yeah. But they're not going to look at it this way, are they?
No, that'll be their excuse to move it on. And, I think in terms of economic policies, and Mises, the great Austrian economist, said that every time they pass a law, they create two new problems. And they do exactly that. So that's true on civil liberties and foreign policy, as well as a condition like this. They create a law, they have a problem, And yes, they're going to pass more laws under the circumstances, and it just behooves me to believe that they could come to the conclusion that the solution is that we have too much freedom. Yeah. And if we only diminish the freedom of the American people and spy on them constantly, all of a sudden we're going to solve some of these problems.
You know, the House Oversight Committee Chairman Jason Chaffetz was interviewed after the acting director was forced to be reassigned, not fired, reassigned, and he was interviewed, and he rightly pointed out that we spent $500 million on new equipment to detect these things, but the failure rate now is worse than in 2007. So he got that right, but unfortunately, he still looks at it with the government solution. He says, you know, I've been a proponent of having bomb-sniffing dogs instead of these fancy equipment, instead of shutting it down, which is what should be done.
You know, I have not taken quite as principled stand as you have, because I do go through the scanner, and I don't like it. I'm always frowning and all this stuff, and they always have to grope. Even though I'm pre-screened, they still do the groping. And I one time was asked to go through twice instead of a confrontation. You know, I went through twice. And the picture is absolutely different. It's not the same. And I tell these scanners, I said, do you know that this is not, doesn't measure anything? And I said, I've had to go through twice, and the picture is completely different. He says, yes. He says, sometimes people move too much. The sensors are very sensitive, and they may change it. So they know darn well that it means nothing. It's just part of that intimidation. We're in charge. Government will take care of you, and you got to roll over. But hopefully we stir up the troops where there will be more resistance. But the real dilemma is when the resistance is so painful that not how many libertarians who are really responsible still fly airplanes. You know, it's pretty tough. There are a few who will still drive, but they're sort of still handicapped. Then it's just terrible. So as far as I'm concerned, what has to be done is we have to raise up a whole generation of individuals to know what true liberty is all about, and government cannot use force, and what is the role of government. If that is the case, we'd have a free society, we'd have sound money, and we would have a sound economic system, and we would have a non-interventionist foreign policy, and we wouldn't be putting up with this nonsense and wasting money to the tune of many billions of dollars. Let's keep working at that.
Let's do it.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the Liberty Report, and come back soon.